welcome to Inspired Leadership, a podcast where we sit down with HR leaders and change makers talking about all the things. I'm Jaime Klein. I am the CEO and founder of Inspire HR, which is an HR path company, and we are thrilled to just have a moment to sit with the brilliant Jaison Williams, who's the former head of talent at organizations you might have heard of, including Warner Brothers, Expedia, Fitbit, etc. And there's no one better to talk about the way that everything AI is unfolding in today's organization. So, Jaison, thank you for taking the time.
Happy to be here.
I was blown away by a post that you recently did about how 2026 is going to be kind of the show me year, the show me year for AI. I would love your take on where we are. What has specifically changed from kind of the hype cycle to kind of this moment of accountability that we find ourselves in 2026?
Yes. So all we've been hearing about for the past year, maybe more, is spend, 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 kind of the race to both build and buy AI and bring it into the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And increasingly, organizations are using their capital expenditures to go out and acquire more AI.
Mm-hmm.
However, what we have not yet demonstrated on par or just even really trending is that they are increasing revenue generation, margin expansion, just overall value creation for the business that supports that level of investment. And
Mm-hmm.
so this year the market is going, okay, I've seen you spend, I've seen you spend. I now want to see some tangible ROI
Uh-huh.
that says this is the right investment or the right set of investments that we should be making.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it is, I sit with many leaders who are nervous because here we are, we're, kicking off Q2 of 26, and they have yet to kind of show that exact ROI. When you point out that kind of, are we saving hours with AI? Is it more about kind of financial performance? Like it's just the financial performance isn't keeping pace. What is your take on why that gap is so persistent?
Yeah, and this is both a combination of research and practical experience. So, on average, research says that individuals in an organization can save between 3 and 10 hours of work per week,
Hmm.
right? So, let's say that's a 30%
Yeah.
um, increase of capacity. What they are not finding is that that now free capacity is being leveraged back into the most value driven work that could be done,
Uh-huh.
right? Leads to a tangible outcome. So, hey, I've saved 7 hours this week. I don't have to spend as much time creating spreadsheets.
Hmm.
You know, that is a blanket example.
Hmm.
What in turn are you using that time saved for? And how is that enabling the organization to achieve its strategic priorities,
Hmm.
right? And most organizations are looking for some type of bottom line impact.
Yes.
That not happening en masse. So if I save 3 or 7 hours within a team, that's great for the team. But again, how is it contributing to the strategic outcomes that the
Hmm.
business said it needs to achieve? And that's the gap.
Hmm. Hmm. And you and I have talked about kind of how layoffs have kind of become this default that
Yep.
organizations kind of took a bet that they were going to save because of that productivity. They can go ahead and do the AI, do the layoff. So how do you think how are companies truly understanding the return on the investment at this moment? Because if they're not seeing it be the layoffs and the work quickly getting done in place of the people, how is it showing up at all?
Yeah. Honestly, I'm going to be a little cynical when I say this.
Okay.
You and I have worked in HR a lot of time for much of our careers, right?
Yes,
And so
all of
when
it.
there's been layoff or reduction in force, it's typically about freeing up cash flow,
Hmm.
right? It's getting some expense off the books.
Hmm.
That's not value creation. That is not growing the business. And
Hmm.
so we've seen examples. I believe it was IBM last year cut up the workforce of 8,000 people, and then they realized, you know what? We actually need many of those people back
Yes.
because we reacted too quickly. Right.
Hmm.
And there's a hypothesis right now that is Jack Dorsey potentially doing the same
Yes.
right, with his organization. And the challenge here is organizations are forgetting all the levers that they have, right? So as you're shifting, and I was talking about this in a recent project with some heads of HR, helping them understand how do you shift from human headcount planning to human and AI headcount planning. And this was in a private equity environment. And
Mm-hmm.
what I told them, I said, look, the outcome of this should not be a default reduction in force.
Mm-hmm.
You've got many other levers. You could close open positions. You could reassign work to low cost, outsource, whether it's in the US or outside
Mm-hmm.
the US.
Mm-hmm.
You could, redesign roles and say, you know what, we're going to take this work and move it to more junior roles and do upskilling. So there's just not one lever of
Mm-hmm.
layoffs, the whole gamut that we've always had, plus a little bit more. And all of those elements are being missed because all we're doing is buying AI, putting it in, and then going, I'm going to reduce the workforce. That is
Mm-hmm.
not bottom line at all.
And it just felt maybe just a little bit preemptive, kind of like how during the pandemic, some organizations did not renew their leases. They're like, why would we do that? We're not going to be on site. And boy, are they scrambling now, right? It was
Yes.
a little bit
Yep.
premature. So I'd love to dive into that work that you did with that PE firm and across the port coast, because it's such a great point about um, it's not a it's really about rethinking the organization and making
Yes.
sure that the org design can keep up with the speed of the change. And this isn't a tech failure, it's more about a org design failure, if you will. So I'd love
Mhm.
what is it that leaders are not understanding about that piece, and how can we quickly educate them on that?
Yeah, I think gap we need to, I'm sorry, the gap where the opportunity
Yeah.
is that you can't make an AI decision that scales immediately.
Mhm.
You still need to take time to figure out how to make sure you've designed the right, workflow, job and work decisions. Those decisions include what intelligence or compared intelligences,
Mhm.
should be working on that. And so even with these Portco HR leaders, the outcome was identify a place in your organization, doesn't have to be in HR, it could be, to pilot where you believe there's an opportunity for human and AI to
Mhm.
drive additional value.
Mhm.
Focus on getting the pilot right, right? Because if the pilot works, you
Right.
then have the ability to have lessons learned. You can create, stronger design principles, and it makes it easier to scale because you've got a proof of concept,
Mhm.
right? You've got an MVP to scale from. And I
Mhm.
think that is getting a lot of organizations flustered right now because they're trying to go from 0 to 100 when
Right.
maybe you need to go from 0 to 10. And if you get that 0 to 10 right, that 10 to 50, that 10 to
Mhm.
70 won't be as challenging because you'll have a good basis and understanding for what it will
Mhm.
take to scale at that level.
Hmm. I love that idea of the pilot. And I think it's really about getting organizations comfortable with this new idea of just how the work gets done. It could be a mashup of some just standalone humans, some just standalone AI, sometimes AI with some help from a human, sometimes some human work with some help from an AI. But it has to be looked at, I think, really differently. And you made this really good point that we have this frontier cutting edge technology, but we're trying to stick it into
Mhm.
2019 org design frameworks, and it's just not a match.
It is not. The world has changed, and not that it's changed so dramatically that you don't have, I'll call it hierarchical levels in an organization, but work now doesn't have to be centralized or kind of owned by a single group. It's
Hmm.
now much easier for the work to be done collaboratively
Hmm.
at speed with shared accountability, kind of all the things we hoped that
Hmm.
collaborative work would bring, but we've had rigid org structures that
Hmm.
didn't all have strong alignment in terms of not only ownership, but what is most important here,
Hmm.
right? What's the decision rights that either shuts this down or moves it forward?
Hmm.
So the move from org charts to, I'd say, more work informed charts is going
Hmm.
to be something that is step by step, and it's going to be unique to every organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love what you said about just kind of not going from 0 to 100. And because you hail from many product cultures, you understand what it
Yes.
is to be in beta, to try something with a small focus group, to try it
Mhm.
for with maybe a 6 month attempt
Yep.
before kind of rolling it out to the organization. And there's a certain agility in that that those of us who grew up in service organizations just might not have. Um, are there any organizations that you can think of that are doing this well? Any examples that we can learn from?
Yeah, two, I'll give one, from my past. I mean, I really think that Expedia, in my time there, we really started perfecting how to use a more agile approach to drive change and transformation. And really that was, adopting more of a product management slash user design approach. So
Mm,
being able to clarify, what a problem statement is, or, what's the hypothesis you're starting from. How do you design a minimum viable product, an MVP, right? Which
mhm,
is smaller in scope, where you can control more of the variables, that you can then create a tiger team that needs to be cross-functional in
mhm,
nature, and look to go and do that work in sprints. What can be accomplished in 6 weeks? What can be accomplished in 8 weeks? And bring in also some elements from the user design era. You
mhm,
know, can you identify two or three personas that, this workflow or this, customer set is? Let's get clear
mhm,
on who we're solving for,
mhm,
so that we can make sure that what we are planning is going to address that particular outcome. And so I think being able to do that, which allows you to move at a much faster pace, but
mhm.
at a
I love that.
small scope, it's, run slow to run fast,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yes.
Run fast to run slow. That's kind of the
Yes.
combination.
Yes. And I love the idea of just having the different personas. And for those of us in HR where the client is the employee, thinking of
Yeah.
three different avatars, three different personas of an employee in terms of how they're kind of ready to take on some of this. Um, You and I had the pleasure of hearing Ethan Malik, a Wharton
Mhm.
professor who runs a lab there, on AI speak recently about this notion of AI productivity gains, creating, 80 decks in a day rather
Yeah.
than just the two decks. The productivity gain isn't having the desired business outcome. And I really appreciated what his comments were, which is around you don't want to use AI to just, build more decks. You want to use it to do something that blows your mind, like build a model, like build something that could,
Yeah.
beat a human in chess, like just things that we never thought
Mhm.
we could do. What,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that of how organizations are currently looking to the productivity and not see and it's not quite syncing with the business outcomes that they had hoped for?
Yeah. And this is a hard one, because I think there's people-centered outcomes and there's business-centered outcomes.
Hmm.
And so, what I would suggest here is there's one element of how do we not lose human centricity. I'll give you an example.
Hmm.
Going through this last period of performance management, I've had peers and former colleagues tell me I had AI write performance reviews. It was so great, right?
Uh-huh.
But
Uh-huh.
that's really not been necessarily what's broken. What's been broken in performance management is actually the truthful conversation between a manager and employee. The plan for how you're going to continue to grow and develop and coach them. So while you figure, okay, did we gain some speed and efficiency with AI writing a performance review? Yes, but did we actually solve the biggest challenge and pain point in that element? I think we have to really scrutinize how to make sure that we're still driving a level of human centricity and some
Yeah.
human value while we
Yes.
use AI. That's kind of the people side.
Yeah.
And then the productivity side, or the innovation side that Ethan spoke to, I mean, that's really what you want to get to be able to unlock. You
Hmm.
know, uh, when we worked at American Express, the business I supported had a really strong ambition around growing the middle market,
Hmm.
right? With all of the data that you now have, right, and the ability to bring external thinking and ideas in, what kind of contextualized prompts or, data analysis now can you do to help you better go after that middle market
Huh?
with an edge over your competitors, or identifying a value proposition that is so unique to you, but the only
Mm-hmm.
way of doing it is parsing, millions of pieces of data
Mm-hmm.
from internal, you know, records, as well as, from external market inputs. And
Yeah.
so we got to do both,
Yeah.
right? The more that we can drive human centricity is great, open up some more productivity, but
Mm-hmm.
also figuring out what are those areas that we really can drive, unique value in,
Mm-hmm.
that shows that spending this amount of money and time on AI is purely, a benefit for the company.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Could we, I believe what gets measured gets done. So could we also just set the narrative that we don't want you to use these AI tools just to, write the first draft of a job description or a performance review and, churn out 12 decks instead of four, but more we want you to use it to do things that move the business, that help us dominate the category,
Yeah,
right? Just things, just kind of using it for just for bigger thinking. Um,
absolutely. Now, I would just say, as a talent leader in the business, goal setting, kind of tracking goals, or helping with, creating, um, I'm blanking on the name, but just really impactful OKRs,
yeah,
right? Was something
yeah.
that was part of me and my team's responsibility to help facilitate and enable across the organization.
Mhm.
Many companies have gone to adding a, like, you must use AI in your work as an objective. That
Mhm.
doesn't the key result. I think getting back to what you were saying is, what's the ambitious, key result that if we really, really stretched ourselves with AI,
Mhm.
we go for. So I think it's
Right.
it's more about, instead of blanket performance goals around using
Mhm.
AI, to be stretch goals, and that stretch needs to be drivers towards outcomes that are changing the trajectory of the business, and at minimum the employee experience.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Maybe you and I can just start some type of like a bumper sticker campaign. It's not about the productivity, it's about blowing your mind, right? Just things like Ethan was talking about, like building like AI where it literally can beat the top world champion in chess, right? And do it faster than
Yes.
it could have 5 years ago. Yeah.
AI only works off of data sets, right?
Uh-huh.
It doesn't have the creativity gene that humans have. So
Mhm.
it can aid you in creating a new idea, but it's not in and of itself going to create something that's completely new. It's just going to be sharing or regurgitating back to you something that's
Mhm.
already been put into the large language model. And I
Mhm.
think we have to make sure that we understand that the creativity element is still going to
Mhm.
come from human, even
Mhm.
if the humans got a strong assist from AI.
Love that. Yeah. There was something else that he said that struck me, which is that organizations are also looking to, they're not measuring for the creative idea that's coming out of the time that's saved. They're just looking at productivity. And what Ethan said is that most employees are not raising their hand and saying, why, yes, I'm more productive with the tool, because they are nervous about flagging that they don't need as many hours to get their job done.
Yeah.
So there's this there's this kind of shadow use of AI that the organization isn't even aware of. And
Hmm.
there's also this notion that there's a lot of firewalls that you can't use maybe the version of AI that you want to on your work desktop. So people kind of to
Yep.
the side of the desk, homes, weekends, or under the desk on their iPhone, they're looking on apps on AI um, tools that are not even available to the company. So the company can't even measure what's really being used. And furthermore, because of the company restricting what tools are used, if people are doing stuff on their iPhone under their desk, guess what? Your company info is out in the large language
Yep.
model that you're not even aware of. So I think that also was an interesting point from his keynote. And it really, like, I just believe sunlight's the best disinfectant. Like, we should just like all come clean on how we're using AI and then build the biggest firewall ever around the real use case, which is like for real how employees are using it. So
Yeah.
it's an
It's
interest.
coming.
Yeah.
But it's coming in a different way. So there's a slow burn on SaaS companies shifting to tokenization,
Hmm.
right? And so tokenization in AI is really going to be a consumption-based model instead of a license price for you get a seat, you get a seat, you get a seat.
Hmm.
I think really once we start to see that shift in terms of how companies are charging for the use of AI, while everyone will have AI, the strongest um, large language models that you have access to will probably start to be limited to certain teams or individuals
Hmm.
where that big capacity is really needed versus I'm just using it to streamline, low value work. Okay, I
Hmm.
can use um, a less costlier version of AI, but
Hmm.
we're really being able to drive demonstrated value creation, demonstrated transformation in the organization,
Hmm.
that tokenization is really going to start making a difference. So we're still in that hyper scaling, but that is a
Uh-huh.
trend that is happening, and probably in the next 2 years we will see more of that as a pricing model, and that's going to be a differentiator in terms
Hmm.
of value
I
creation.
love that. So then if we were to meet again and say 28 and sit down on inspired leadership again, and we said, remember back in 2026 where it was the show me year, what would you then
Yeah,
call the year of 2028, I wonder?
that's going to be optimization.
I like that.
Yeah,
That can be another bumper sticker of ours. So when we go back to the kinds, just to kind of close out on the org chart
yeah.
versus the work chart, this is a brand new concept. This is not
Hmm.
the conversation that HR leaders usually have at the table. How and may I just say, I think some of us feel like we earned our seat at the table because we could talk in org charts. So I just want to
Yes,
also HR practitioners are humans too, and they may not
yes.
want to talk about the work chart, but you and I can. How would you explain in a couple of sentences to the president of an organization this mindset
Hmm.
shift of going from the org chart to the work chart? How do you boil
Yes.
it down for a non-HR ear?
Yeah, so we'd be moving from organizing the organization
Yeah.
based on functional teams, and instead we'd be focusing on what's the most critical and strategic work that needs to get done, and
Okay.
how do we create, I call it a pod, right, where all of the cross-functional individuals and intelligences that are doing that critical work
Hmm.
operate as one intact group.
Okay.
They still would need to retain some functional expertise. And so
Hmm.
we'd keep smaller centers of excellence around because
Hmm.
they still need to scan externally and internally to make
Hmm.
sure that they have the most skill, capability, and knowledge for that specialization. But on
Okay.
a day in, day out basis, they'd be part of this new pod. So you can almost, one maybe easy way to think about this is if you go to your strategic priorities,
Yep.
and let's say you have three strategic priorities, maybe under each one of those is three key areas of work. Imagine taking each one of those three key areas of
Hmm.
work and saying, you know what, we're just going to organize a team structure around that specific piece of work where there's no more boundaries between
Uh-huh.
finance, people, technology,
Uh-huh.
marketing. It's one integrated group. So it's collaborative work on steroids,
Yeah, yeah.
but that's the direction that we need to go. And that will ultimately optimize also how AI is being used because
Hmm.
within those work groups, it's all streamlined about driving that strategic
Hmm.
outcome for the business.
I love it. So, say, for example, an organization that had tried offshoring wanted to bring it home and go from offshore to onshore.
Yeah.
So, rather than saying that this is an HR thing, you would have kind of
Hmm.
what you call a tiger team made up of
Yes.
HR, real estate, technology, and finance. And they would just meet on the regular and move very quickly, each having AI agents. But it isn't about, well, this is my boundary and this is just my responsibility line. It's just we're going to get the huge work done of moving
Right.
work back to onshore.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And if you if you think about older concepts, because I think some of them can still apply, right? So we used to work with RACIs, right? Who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, advised, and then I learned about the RACI D, right? Who owns the decision rights? All
Uh-huh.
of that is that group,
Okay.
right? It's no longer outside of it because you've got end-to-end responsibility.
Yes.
And so there is a halfway step to this, and that is project-based organizations.
Mhm.
Not too long ago, there was an HBR idea cast on this concept, and the expert they were interviewing was talking about two or three companies that have implemented project-based structure and organization. That's kind of the halfway step to
Okay.
the work chart versus the org chart. So for
Yes.
those who are interested in learning more, go first study and see how the project-based organizations
Uh-huh.
are set up, and that will give you, I think, a strong um, mental framework and understanding for what might it take to move to that work based structure.
Maybe our 2027 podcast could be how 2027 is the year of the project-based structure, but that doesn't really roll off the tongue. We'll have to think of something cooler to say, but something along those lines. That's the in-between step. Thank you so much for your wisdom. And before we wind down, I always love to ask folks
Yep.
what they do for self-care, what they do to fuel themselves. How do you show up the way you want to? What do you do for self-care?
Yes. Well, the number one thing I'm known for, I'm a big runner. And so running, exercising is what I do for self-care. It's
Beautiful.
really freeing and allows my mind to go where it needs to go.
It's great. And do you listen to podcasts when you run?
No, I listen to nothing. It is just my brain. And
Love.
so I go from thinking about nothing to trying to solve a problem to um, even prayer at times,
Yeah.
but I
Oh,
just
yes.
work through my thoughts and running. So that's the big thing
Beautiful.
for me.
I love that. It's great. I love it. Well, thank you so much for your wisdom. I so appreciate it. And happy spring. And we will be in close touch. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. Take care.